Scenario planning, this is a place where you would use deterministic scenarios to help manage internally. If you're worried about a specific event, a hurricane, really bad hurricane would be a good example. Terrorism, that type of thing. If you have a modeling constraint, I just don't know how to do it. For a long time, we didn't have really good ideas on how to do stochastic mortality and morbidity. So we just pick a deterministic scenario to manage that. And time constraint. I mean, I can remember 20 years ago wanting to do a run that would take 300 machine years. And they told me I couldn't do it. And so then we got new machines, and I said, okay, now it's only going to take me 150 man years. And we're still not to a point where I can do really everything that you want to do. This is an example of an event risk scenario, and it comes back to the pandemic work that I've done. One of the things as you're reading stuff in the newspaper and you hear different companies say, oh, it's not going to be a big deal, watch this number here, the mortality in the sophisticated countries. Most of them are using a rate of 0.1% rather than 0.6%, which that comes directly from 1918. And there were some good articles in this morning's Toronto paper talking about how certain populations are being impacted really strongly, more strongly than they had expected, and the lack of benefit of having enough ventilators and things like that. So that's one. Risk to the life insurer, it's not just claims, it's if you plan for business continuity in terms of how you can work from home, for example, when you've got people who are going to be at home, that'll also play out in other situations, when you have a snowstorm, when you have a tornado, when you have Oktoberfest, when you can't get to school because there's too much traffic. Claims is another one. Risk to insure, obviously, you're going to have higher claims. Liquidity. At the same time as you have a real severe pandemic, which what we've had so far has been bad and certainly has impacted a lot of people, but has not impacted the markets nearly as much as it could. Because there, if you've got higher claims, you need more cash, but at the same time your assets are going to be down. And then your counterparty, I mentioned before, the reinsurer risk. Emerging risks. Okay. This is one, we've got just a couple minutes to go through these. This is my list of things that I'm worried about right now. I've done some emerging risk research in the past, and we're doing some new stuff that's getting ready to get started. But the subprime resets, there's a whole group of those over the next 6 months that are going to be reset to a higher rate, to a lot higher rate. Municipality credit risk. The state of California is going to pay their December 31st paychecks on January 1st so they can avoid their budget, so they can move it to another calendar year budget. I mean, clearly it's messed up. And we've got a lot of, Omaha is just as bad as anyone else. The, fire and police, they are able to retire at age 45 after 20 years, for life pension, and they're able to crank up the number of hours that they work in the last year that they work by working. It works by seniority, and so the guy who's just getting ready to retire can go work all the football games and get credit for those hours, just by standing out the football game, and you end up having. I read something just in the last couple of days, not about Omaha but somewhere else, that there were people retiring. California prison workers were making $300,000 a year, which is just insane. I mean, something's gone wrong and is going to have to be adjusted. Commercial mortgages, we're going to be seeing that this year too. A lot of companies have been trying to make it, and I think you're going to see them go over the edge and not make it. Energy costs. Think about this from an oil perspective. When I first wrote this slide, oil was, would it get down to $40 a barrel? At that lower rate, there was a concern about Venezuela and Russia, that they would implode because they needed the amount of money that the government was spending based on inflows of energy money was based on like $60 a barrel. So if the energy prices had stayed low, you could have had some real political instability. Now, if the price goes way high, then obviously the economy falters. And so you have that balance there. And I think, much as I like low oil prices, I don't think that the world can survive a political instability in that many different places right now. Inflation is out there. All the seeds for inflation have already been planted. It's just a matter of how long will it take. I would make the argument that we're probably comparable to the late 1960s right now, and we're probably several years away, but it will come. Consolidation. We had this problem with banks too big to fail. So what did we do? We merged them into other big banks that were too big to fail. Now they're even bigger banks that are too big to fail. That's got to change at some point, or it's just going to implode again. A combination of risks. One of the things that we found in some of our emerging risk work is that combination of risks is one of the things that causes the biggest problem. One of the things we did in our survey last year was to talk about food shortages and say, okay, pick, I can't remember if we did, I think 2 risks, combination of 2 risks that would cause a food shortage. And it was interesting, the responses that we got from around the world. It was an international survey. And we really are anchored in our own experience. A lot of the behavioral finance guys talk about anchoring in terms of what you invest in and things like that. But even when we look at emerging risks, we did the survey in October last year, and the Mumbai attacks were the last week in October. We got 3 surveys that came in late after that. All the rest of them were before that. Hardly any of these talked about terrorism as one of the top risks. All 3 of these listed as one of the top 5, and one of them listed it as number 1, just because it was recent. So one of the things that we're looking at doing with our emerging risk survey is to use it as a contrarian indicator. That if people are real worried about this, boy, let's look at some other things too and make sure that those aren't falling down. Catastrophic risks, just as important. There's a company called RMS, Risk Management Solutions, I believe it is, and they put out a paper talking about the number of deaths if someone went to the top of the Sears Tower, busted out a window, and threw anthrax out in the wind. Very easy to do. I mean, it really is. I mean, I've been up fairly high, and if you had nobody checked you for a sledgehammer, somebody could take that very easily and do that. In Chicago, that's a crossroads right by the Michael Jordan statue. Some of you might know where that is. Is a crossroads of all the train tracks in America. A lot of fertilizer, a lot of liquid nitrogen, things like that. Other things that are flammable and disastrous. New York City, a lot of people talk about how easy it would be to poison the water just north of New York City in the Hudson. Natural, some of them aren't terrorism. The California levees, people would say that the only thing you know about levees is that eventually they'll fail because they're not kept up well enough. And so eventually, if those levees up in Sacramento fail, it'll flood San Francisco, and then San Francisco will have no water at the same time. The New Madrid Fault, anybody familiar with that? That's near St. Louis. It goes off, I think the last time it went off was early 1800s. Goes off about every 200 years. The last time when it went off in 1600, there was a population of American Indians in that area in the millions. And within 2 years after it hit, there was nobody there. So it'll be interesting to see how St. Louis makes through that. I just watched something recently about New York City and the fault lines underneath New York City. There's a lot of things out there, hurricanes.